All right, so GIS Basics. For those of you who are pretty new to GIS, GIS, of course, stands for Geographic Information Systems, and it's a system, a software system, made up of a whole lot of different components. They say it's made up of not only the software, but the hardware, the data, the methods, and the person, the actual people pushing the buttons to make it happen. So it's a big system of multiple components that allows us to do different types of things. So it allows us to create and collect and store spatial data. So when we say spatial data, we mean data and information that belong to a location on the Earth. Mapping and visualizing and symbolizing that data, creating an output product, whether it's a static map or an interactive map on the web. And then solving spatial problems. So asking questions of our data. Asking questions like, let me go back a slide if I can. Where do the trails cross the streams? And maybe there's an impact there. Where do trails go across fragile alpine tundra? Maybe we need to have signs to remind people to stay on the trail. So things like that, allowing us to answer questions of our data so that we can find solutions or improve the quality of the land or things like that, out of examples. Okay, the way GIS works is we have this idea of layers. So here we have in the graphic, we have layers of demographics, consumer lifestyles, natural hazards, your data. This is kind of a random example. But we have this idea of layers, and each individual entity on the face of the Earth can be represented in its own layer, and then you overlay the layers together, and that's how you get the ability to perform analysis and make maps. So we have this idea of layers, and they're all overlaid together. Then you can answer questions, make maps. How do the layers overlay in the right spot? It's all based on coordinates, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. When you're learning about GIS for the first time, you'll learn about this idea of vector data and raster data. So vector data and raster data are what we call the two data storage models. They're just different approaches to storing the real world entities somehow in a GIS. So vector data is what we say is how we store discrete data. So points, lines, polygons. So in this graphic at the top, we have points for elk locations. We have lines here, those are contours. And then over here, we have polygons that are vegetation. So everything within that area is the same type of vegetation. So points, lines, and polygons for discrete data, typically man-made things like boundaries, roads, but streams and waterways, like those can be vector as well. And then raster data is the other data storage model, and that is a grid cell based format. So everything is made up of grid cells. So here on the left, we have what's called a DEM. I mentioned this one before. The DEM is the digital elevation model. And if you zoom in on it, you'll see this one here. And if you zoom in on it, you can see there's actual little pixels. Just like if you took a picture on your camera and zoomed in too much on it, it would look really grainy and pixely. Same idea, because every picture from your phone here, that is actually creating a raster. A picture from a phone or a digital photograph, each grid cell is the color, and then you get to see your whole picture. In spatial data, each grid cell, in this case for the DEM, each grid cell is the height above sea level. And so you can take that value and then perform some type of analysis on it. In this example here, we have a satellite image, and on the bottom one, it looks really clear, and the top one, it looks really fuzzy. And that's because the pixel size is bigger, so we don't have as much detail. So the pixel size or grid cell size will have a big impact on how your raster looks. And analyses and symbology and things that you do to each vector data versus raster data, they will vary quite a bit. We're going to focus on vector data today, and then on Wednesday, we'll touch upon raster data just a little bit. And then perhaps the most important thing with your data are the attributes. So we say this is the I in GIS, Geographic Information Systems. So every feature on the map has information about that feature stored in a table, and then that's how we can actually perform analysis. That's where the information is, so we can ask the questions. So we have our geography, the part that we see, and then we have the attributes, the information in the table. This is really just for your reference. I'm not going to go over all of it, but there are a whole lot of different file formats. So just like you could write up a paragraph of text and save it as a Word doc, or you could save it as a text file or an RTF in the spatial data world, there are a lot of different ways to store your data. In the Esri world, which is the software that we'll be using, there's something called a shapefile and a geodatabase. You may have heard of KML. How many of you have heard of KML? That's from Google. So if you just had points to store, if you had GPS information of elk locations, you could store it as a shapefile. You could store it, still just look like your points. A couple other formats, GeoJSON, GeoPackage. These are ones as a beginner you probably won't encounter, but as you get deeper into GIS, you might. For those of you who might record GPS data from a GPS unit, you might have the option to save it as a GPX file. So that's another format that can then be brought in and turned into points. And then tables. A lot of you might be working with tables. So within ArcGIS, you might have Excel files, you might have text files, CSVs, DBFs, a couple other formats are out there as well. And all of those table formats can actually be brought into ArcGIS. And the information in the table can potentially either be plotted on a map or linked to another table and then plotted on a map, or just used to be linked and used for analysis. So data that you can use comes in a lot of different formats. All right, any questions so far? All right, let's take a look now at ArcGIS Pro. ArcGIS Pro is one of several different GIS software packages available. It happens to be made by a company called Esri, who is kind of the leader in GIS. It is proprietary or commercial software, which immediately a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to use it. There are free options out there as well. One of them is called QGIS, but most employers will probably want ArcGIS experience, which is why we teach it in our classes. In academia, the open source stuff, QGIS and R, is more common to come across. But if you ever go into like a government job, it'll be ArcGIS for sure. So now, the moment of truth. Let's try to go into remote desktop and open ArcGIS Pro. Who's ready? All right, so let's try that. I am going to actually jump out of the slides, and I'm going to open up ArcGIS on my machine, and you guys open it up on your machine. And if you have one monitor, this might get tricky, but I will walk you through things, and then you can flip back and forth if you need to between the slides and my visual and then your own Pro. So I'm going to hop into here. So we're going to open up ArcGIS Pro. And while it's doing that, oh, it's going to expire in 15 days. Oh, yeah. You can just ignore that. Every year on July 1st, CSU renews its license agreement with Esri. And so that's what that is about. If you are seeing that, that's fine. So when you open up ArcGIS Pro, it's going to ask you to like create and save a project before you even start, which might seem like putting the cart before the horse, but it's just how it works. So when you open up ArcGIS Pro, you're actually going to click map, and you're going to create and save your map before you start. But before we get too far, if you are having trouble opening it or getting in, let us know. So you can write it into the chat, or you can just unmute. Okay, how are we doing? We're doing good? If you're in remote desktop, you should not need to sign in to get into Pro. If you install locally on your machine, then you do need to sign in because the licensing is different. So Taylor, how are you? Are you on remote desktop? Okay, so then you have to obviously sign in to get into remote desktop, but once you're in remote desktop, you should just be able to open up Pro without signing in. Okay, so once you get to this window here, let's go through and we're gonna just make our own map. We're gonna make our first ArcGIS Pro map. So I'm gonna hit map right here. And then the window that pops up next is asking me again, where do I want to create this project? I haven't even started yet and it's already making me save. That's okay. So what you want to do is browse to a location. So if you're on remote desktop, what you want to do is save it. And I'm going to copy and paste it into the chat so we can see it again. What you want to do is make your own folder in this path in the chat and classes workspace. So make your own folder in there. If you're already in here, like if you get to a location, I'm going to do it on C Student because I'm on my own machine. But once you get into here, if you need to make a folder, notice up here under new item, there's an option to make a new folder if you haven't already done it. So that's a way that you can do it right from here. So you want to make you want to pick a folder to save your project in, which I'm just going to pick this folder for the workshop. Pick a folder to save your project in and then give it a name, something that makes sense. I'm going to call it CLTL Demo Map Day 1. We'll do another one on Wednesday as well. So you give your project a name and you tell it where to save it. And Roberta has a question. Yep, you can unmute if you want.
Okay, yeah. I'm trying to follow along and I have a question because I'm working on a GIS project with a partner. So I want to make sure that I save it in a location where we can both access it. Is that in the N drive?
If that person has access to the N drive, then theoretically, yes. But the way IT set up this particular N classes workspace folder, which I never hit enter, so you can't see it yet. N classes workspace, if you make a folder in there under your account, then you're the only one that can see it. So the N drive in this case might not be the best place to share things. But what about, there's a way to do it through OneDrive, which you should have access to OneDrive. So for today, it might be hard using this workspace folder, but there are other ways to do it. So if you want, I can show you how to set that up because you should have access to OneDrive, and that's how I've shared data with Josh, actually, who was my TA for my class. And that worked pretty well. Do you need to share what you do today with that person? Kristen's saying no. Okay.
We can figure it out.
Okay, yeah, so for the future, we can definitely figure it out, but for today, you won't be able to share it. Okay, thanks. All right, any other questions or problems? Okay. All right, so we opened up Pro, we said new map, we're giving it a name and location, we're gonna hit okay. And then it creates it and we get a blank window. It takes a moment. It takes more moments than you think it should. Okay, so now we have our new blank map. Get rid of that. Oh, and I lost my, hold on, I lost my big thing there. Okay. All right, so here we have the ArcGIS Pro interface, which is potentially a little daunting at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not that bad. Okay, bye, John. Have a good drive back. So in the middle, you'll see the most prominent thing is the map. So when you open it up, you have this base map. It's just generically kind of centered on the United States. On the left, we have what's called the contents.
You're cutting
GIS
out a bit.
being this idea, how we're having this idea of layers, and we have all these different layers to represent. I'm cutting out. Oh no. Is that better now? Maybe. I wonder if my husband is stealing all my bandwidth. He's on a meeting. We have this idea of layers, and so every different type of object or entity or like group of objects can be stored in their own layer, and those layers are stored as their own files, and the files get added into this contents as layers, and then we can see them on top of each other. Flip over to the right side of the window, the catalog. The catalog is kind of like our folder explorer and also our project explorer, because the project can have different pieces to it. Right now we're looking at a generic map, but you could have more than one map. You could have multiple maps. You could have a map that's centered on CSU, zoomed in. You could have a map that's centered on Larimer County. You could have a third map for the whole state. So you can have multiple maps, and then underneath here, it will show you all the maps that you have in your project. The other thing, which we don't have yet, is map layout. So once you try to like make a map layout to create a PDF or to print it out, your map layouts will show up in here as well. But the big thing that we need to know from this catalog window right now is folders. So folders is a way that you can go look at any folder that you have access to. You won't see them all listed here by default. It makes you kind of connect to it. It makes you make a shortcut to it. And that's by design, just to save performance and efficiency. But you can right click on this thing called folders and add a folder connection. And then you can go and browse to the folder that contains your data. So everyone, let's go do that right now. So you guys will have your data in the N drive. If you've copied it from the N drive that I gave you, which is, I'm just gonna paste it again. So in the chat, this is all the data that I'm giving you. So ideally, you should actually copy the contents of that folder. Didn't hit enter. Ideally, you should copy the contents of that folder to your own folder on N, but it's not critical. It will just work better if you copy it. So wherever the data are living, you want to go and find it. So on my machine, it's going to be C student. On yours, it'll be somewhere on N. And so I can see, is that it? Yeah. There's my folder, and I'm going to hit OK. So you want to go find the folder where all the data are living and just stop at the top level folder and hit OK. And now everything in the folder will show up in here. So we're just making a shortcut to the folder, really.
Can I ask a question for everybody?
Yeah.
Is anybody else using a Mac laptop with the remote desktop? And have you figured out how to right click on the remote desktop? Because
this came up with another student of mine, and I forget how to do it off the top of my head. If you do a quick Google search.
Yeah, that's what I just want to know if anybody.
It's like one little setting. Yeah, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Does anyone else remember?
Mine's working fine, and I'm using a Mac, but
Just Control is working on the remote desktop for you?
I just do my normal right click, and it works fine on the remote desktop.
Okay,
with two
I'll figure it out. That was all. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, if anyone finds the trick to that, if it's not working for someone else and you find the trick to it, please share it. You can just put it into the chat. But that's a really good question. That's a big issue with the remote desktop. We have that a lot this spring in my class. Oh, Josh just posted a link. Thanks. Okay, so we're in Pro. We have our map, and on the right we have our folder list. So once you make that connection or that shortcut to your folder, you should be able to see all the layers. So I've expanded mine. So if you're looking at my screen, you should be able to see all the same layers that I showed you in that slide a few minutes ago. And then you can add them to the map. So you can click on any one. So let's click on RMNP boundary. So if you find RMNP boundary in that CLTL.gdb, and if you click and hold and drag it over, you'll get like a little plus sign, and then you can drop it. And what that will do is add that layer to the map. And it always do an awful color like hot pink or puke green. And here we got a pastel pink, better than hot pink, I guess. And that's how you can add layers. So we have all these different layers that are their own, we call them feature classes. Officially, like the real name for them are feature classes. And each feature class becomes a layer in the map once we add it to the map.
Can I ask a question, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to go back to my Zoom and unmute myself.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to find where all that data is located on folders so I can add the shortcut that you just walked us through.
Yep.
So when I do like add folder connection and then I click on that CNR DOM, like the N folder, and then it has like a bunch of different folders within there, and I don't know where all of this data is located.
Yep. So I put the chat into the screen, so hopefully you can see the chat window.
Oh,
So
okay.
in the N drive, if you go into classes, and then last semester, spring 2020, and I threw it into NR 493 because it was one of a couple of folders that I had permission to put stuff into, and so I put it in there.
Oh, okay. And then the CLTL GIS workshop.
It was kind of a weird spot. Yep. So everything in that entire folder is what we're using today. There's not much, it's just some data and then a text file with a link to the slides. That's it.
It says the container is empty when I open up that CLTL GIS workshop folder.
You just want to click on the folder. You don't need to open it.
Okay,
Yes.
so just select it and then okay.
Yeah, yeah. So if you stop at the folder and not double clicking on the folder.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So we've got one layer in there so far. Let's add a couple other layers in there as well. So let's add streams. So again, I'm going to go to the right side of the catalog and I'm going to just throw in streams. I'm going to click and hold and drag and drop it in. And the map looks way uglier. Let's add in Bear Lake Veg Poly. And really, it doesn't matter what layers you add in. I just want to add a couple different choices in. And what else? What else would you like to add in? Want to do elk or campsites? Who says elk? Who says campsites? Oh, it's a tie. It's a tie. All right, I'm going to do elk. Okay, so there are some elk. Oh, but the elk don't really cover the veg poly. We can do both. Look at that. We have the power. Okay, so a couple folks, looks like they're still working on accessing the data. If you need any help with troubleshooting, Josh can help you out with that.
For campsites, did you add just the normal campsites or the campsites _CSV?
I added the one without the CSV, but let me add the other one too, and I'll show you the difference.
Okay.
So we'll add both. Okay. So now we have a bunch of general sort of layers in there. And each of these things now in our contents, we would call a layer. And thinking back to what I was saying about vector data, points, lines, and polygons, if you take a look at the contents, we have campsites, and the icon for it is a dot. That's a point layer. Streams, the icon for it is a little line. That's a line layer. The veg poly and the boundary, they have like a rectangular patch. Those are polygon layers. So we have points and lines and areas or polygons, and these are the different ways that we can abstract the real world. So now let me ask you guys, what data do you work with? What data might you need to collect or acquire or download? And what format do you think it would be in? I don't know who it was in the survey, but one of you mentioned conservation easements or conservation areas. Is that someone who's here? I don't know. But something like that might be a polygon. Someone else had mentioned something with improvement projects. Would those be like maybe a point location, or would those cover a large area? They could be either, I guess, depending on the scale that you want to make the map at. So an improvement project could be, if you're zoomed out, if you're looking at the map from really zoomed out, you might just want to dot where that improvement project is. But if the improvement project was in a meadow or around a building and you were really, really zoomed in, then you might actually have that as a polygon. So point, line, and polygon, there's no definitive answer to what should be stored as what type. It might just depend on your data. Okay, so in addition to the contents, the map, and the catalog, let's take a look up at the top. So the top of our ArcGIS Pro window, we have all these different tabs. So there's a map tab, and under the map tab, we have a bunch of navigation tools, and the default one is this one called Explorer. So if you click on that and then go to your map, you can see, you can pan around. And then if you use your mouse wheel, you can scroll in and out. So we can zoom into the vegetation area here. There's buttons here with arrows that point in and out, and that's just to fix, zoom in and zoom out. I'm going to zoom back out again. Notice that we have a base map underneath. If you don't like that base map, or you're looking for a different style for your map, there's a whole bunch of different base maps as well. So you can get imagery, or you can get kind of generic ones just to have a point of reference behind it. Just a whole bunch of different styles here. So if you are really zoomed into a certain area, I'm going to uncheck my 2 polygon layers so we can see through it. But you can turn on imagery and then actually see the land better. So if you needed to trace, if you were trying to trace an area that might be at risk, or conservation easements that was like the edge of a meadow up to a road bordered by a stream, maybe you would want to look at an image, and then you could use the natural features in the landscape to trace your area from. Okay, let's hop back to the slides here. So we took a quick look at ArcGIS Pro. We went in, we did most of these things. We got up to step 4. One thing that you might be noticing is some of the colors are pretty awful and hideous. So let's go through and figure out how to change the symbology and make a better looking map. So hop back out. Oops. And go into Pro. And I'm just going to turn off my base map. Notice that in my contents, every little layer has a checkbox. So you can actually uncheck the box so that it doesn't draw. So I'm going to uncheck my base map, and then I don't have anything behind it, and then I can see the colors a little bit better. Okay, so if we wanted to give our streams better symbology, there it goes. If we wanted to give our streams better symbology, what could we do to that? What could we do to that layer?
Change the color.
Yeah, change the color immediately. Anything that's water should be some shade of blue. So there are a few different ways that we can change symbology. I'm going to show you all 3. The first 2 are really short. The first option, I can right-click on the symbol patch. Just right-click on that little line, and then I just get some color choices, and I can make it a blue. Okay, so now they're blue. The second thing I can do is not a right click, but a regular left click. Just click on the symbol. And then notice what's on the right is I get some kind of default styles that I can pick from. You can scroll down. There's one for water, just kind of a faded blue. If I want to go even, there's another water, that's a different shade of blue. If I wanted to do more, so right now I'm looking at what's called the gallery. So when you click on a symbol patch, you get to this gallery. And then if you want to change it even more, you can go next to the word gallery, you can go to properties. And then you can actually change everything you want about the line. So I could change the color right here. I can make it blue. In the line width, I can make it any number I want. I could say 0.5. And then you have to hit apply at the bottom to make it actually update. So that's 0.5. I could make it 3 or not. Here. I could make it 3 and then hit apply. And now it's like way thick. That would be ugly. Don't do that. I think about 1 is probably good. I'm just going to keep it at 1. So you can change the color. You can change the line width of a line. So these are streams, so that's pretty basic and fine. Let's go back to the left. I'm going to turn off my elk. I'm just going to uncheck that box. And now let's take a look at campsites. What do you think campsites should look like on a map?
Little tents or something, like an icon.
Yeah, little tents. So notice how you can click on a layer and it'll highlight in blue. And whatever layer you have highlighted is the one on the right that you'll change the symbology for. So if I highlight campsites, then the right side will let me change the properties for campsites. If you lost this window, poof, it's gone. If you closed it by accident or can't find it, then just click on the patch. Just click on the actual dot symbol and it'll bring it back. So again, under gallery, so notice at the top here, we have the gallery. And the gallery will be different for points or lines or polygons because they all have different types of styles. But in the gallery, you can do a search. Type in camp, so there's campground. If you go to this little drop down on the right, all styles, you might get some more options to pop up there. So you can pick one. If you're gonna make a web map, so some of what you might be doing is making a web map. If you're gonna make a web map, I don't recommend doing really complex ones because they don't really work well and they really slow down your map. So just a simple one is probably fine. So if I click on that, now they all become little tents. Actually, they all become kind of big tents. I don't really like them, they're too big. So again, back into properties, I could go into properties. Now I have more options, and under size, I could make it a smaller size. And I could just keep hitting down until I think it looks good. And then once you like it, you hit apply and it'll update it. Okay, so we've changed a line layer and we've changed a point layer. Now let's go through, we'll do the Rocky Mountain boundary. When you're looking at the boundary, you might want it a different color. You might want it to just be an outline and not have a fill color. You might want to have it transparent so you can kind of see through it. So there's a whole bunch of different things you can do to polygons. We're not going to do that much right now, but we will look at a couple. So let's click on RMNP boundary. We'll highlight it here on the left so we can get to the properties on the right. And then we can click on a little patch right here. And then we get to where we were before, where we have gallery and properties. What's kind of neat is that you can really easily make it hollow. So the fill color, you can just have it say no color. Just click on that little color patch and say no color, and then hit apply. And now you can see there's no fill, but there is an outline. And we can see the outline is really faint and not really very good. So think about how you've seen parks on maps and make it a little bit better. Maybe some type of green and thicker. Green. Some shade of green, maybe that shade of green, and maybe thicker, like that. I don't really like that shade of green, but I don't care. So now we can see the outline. Another neat thing you can do is add a transparency. So you can go back to the fill color, and we can make it some type of pale green, which of course would be solid and awful. That's awful. But what you can do is for any layer that is highlighted, you can go way up to the top to appearance. I always think I'm going slow enough, and then I'm told I'm not. I'm sorry. Do you have any questions? Do you want to go back and cover anything again? Okay. So for any layer that you have highlighted in here, you can highlight it and it'll show up in blue. And then you can go up to appearance. And there's a whole bunch of different things you can do to appearance. You'll probably not ever use most of them, but you probably will use this one here, and that's transparency. So that's kind of a neat effect. And there's a slider bar. I'm going to make mine very transparent. And then you can like turn on your imagery again, and then you can see the boundary, but you can see through it as well. So for symbology, you can do three things. We never did the third one. The first one is just right click on it and you can change the color and nothing else. The second one is you can just click on the patch. Just click on the patch and you'll get to this right side symbology. And then the third one, which we haven't done yet, is you can highlight any layer in the contents. And then under appearance, you have a symbology button, and that will take you to the same place. So the second and third ones actually take you to the same place, but just different ways to get there. Okay, I'm going to turn off that imagery again because I don't like it. Okay. All right, what else would you like to see with these layers? What other?
Can you show where you got that world imagery from? I don't see that showing up.
So under the map tab, so back over here under the map tab, if you look, there's a whole bunch of stuff on here, but kind of in the middle in this layer section, there's a Basemap drop down. So under the Basemap drop down, you can have imagery, and that's just plain imagery, or imagery hybrid will also give you labels. And that's what we have here. So map tab, Basemap, and then you can choose which one you like. My favorite one is probably topographic. I just find it's easiest to look at underneath most types of data. It has a little shaded relief, it has some labels in it, and I find that one to be the nicest. If anyone does anything with USGS topo maps, way at the bottom of this list is USA topo maps, and that's actually your quad maps, and there's a lot of good detail in there.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm still here. How can we zoom in on the map?
Oh yeah, so there are two ways to zoom in. So again, under the map tab, if you're using your Explorer tool right here, the first way to zoom in is just with the wheel on your mouse. So you can scroll with the wheel. And then the other way to zoom in is a little trickier. If you hold down Shift, like just have a finger on the Shift key, and then use your mouse to draw a box. So it takes 2 hands, but then when you let go, it'll zoom to that box that you drew.
Also, if you hold down the Z key and then move your mouse up or down, it'll zoom in and out.
Yeah, so there's a few ways to do it. Another thing, let's say you just got all kinds of lost in the world on your map and like what happened here. Sometimes this will happen and you're so zoomed in you can't even figure out which way to go. There's also a way that you can right click on a layer, and when you right click on any layer you get all these different options, and we'll look at a couple of them in a minute. But if you right click on a layer and go down to here, you'll see an option for zoom to layer. And so then that will zoom you back to the extent of just that one layer. So if you're very lost and zoomed into the wrong spot, it'll take you back. So right click, zoom to layer, and there you go. All right, any other questions that you're wondering right now?
I have one just about transparency.
Sure.
Is there any way to, because you do it by the layer, it made, like, for example, the Rocky Mountain Park boundary and the inside, is there any way to make one of them transparent and not the other? Because it also made the boundary transparent.
Correct. So let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to go back to my layer, and I'm going to go back to appearance and take off the transparency. Hello. There. I'm going to take off that transparency. In the symbology options, there's a way to make the fill have a transparency, but the outline not. Is that what you're asking for? Yeah, that's actually a really nice effect. So here I am, I'm going to click on my boundary layer. I'm going to click on the patch, which takes me to the right side of the window with my symbol properties. And I have my fill color, which is just called color, and my outline color. If I go to my fill color, there's a way that I can go down here to the properties. And in the properties of just the fill, the bottom slider is a transparency.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. And so now my outline is, I'm making it a better shade of green. My outline is dark, but my fill is very transparent. And when I hit apply, it'll look like that. Good question. What other questions do you have right now? Okay. In terms of the interface, just a couple other things to show you for the interface. Let's take a look at campsites. If you right click on the campsites layer, you'll see all these options. So copy, remove if you want to take it out. Removing a layer from the contents, by the way, does not delete it from the hard drive. So just like if you have a Spotify playlist and you put a song in your playlist and then you decide you don't like it anymore and you remove it from the playlist, that song, you still have it, it still exists, it's not deleted, it's just not in the playlist. So think of your contents like a playlist of layers that you want to look at. So you can add layers in and you can remove them. You can add layers in multiple times and give them different symbology to show different things, but you still only have one layer on the hard drive. So each layer in the contents is pointing to the actual file on your hard drive or network drive or whatever. But if I right click, the first big thing on this list in my menu is the attribute table. And so if I open my attribute table and then play around with the window so I can see a little more of that table, I'm going to just shrink these a little bit. This is the table for my campsites. So every point on the map has a record in this table. If I just kind of randomly click number 2 right here, you can see that one of them in the middle turned bright blue because they are connected. This number 2 record in the table is this point on the map. And so there's a connection between them. There's a one-to-one relationship between the table and the map. And so this campsite here has all of these different pieces of information. So we have a code for the site, we have the name for the campsite, and then the XY coordinate information. And so that's what makes up our data. So all of our data has what we see on the map and then information in the table. Now these campsites came from a table themselves. This table, in fact. So if I right click on that CSV, it's the RMNP campsite CSV. If you didn't add it, it's in the catalog. You can find it in the catalog. But if you right click on this CSV and do open, you'll see it's basically the same thing. So what we did was we took a CSV that had XY coordinates and we told ArcGIS, plot these XY coordinates as points on a map, just on like an XY axis, and then it gave us the points. So if you have data in a table, you can get it on a map pretty much always. If you have anything that's related to a place or a location, you can get it on a map. And that's how these campsites came about. So someone went out and GPSed it, added a couple of pieces of information, and then we just plotted it. How many of you think you might need to do something like that for your data? Okay, so either with XY coordinates, or how many of you might have addresses or survey results that have place names, anything like that? A couple of head nods, okay. So we'll talk more about that on Wednesday.
Sorry, I have a really quick question.
Sure.
I lost my catalog. How do I find it again?
Yep, great question. So look, I lost my catalog. Where did it go? I'm gonna just, there. If you lose a panel, then what you can do is go up to your view menu here, or the view tab, I guess. And under the view tab, you can turn them back on. So here's my catalog pane. The catalog pane is the panel on the right, so that'll bring it back. The contents pane, same thing. If you lose your contents on the left, you can bring that back from the view tab contents. All right.
And then how did you open the attribute table again?
Yep, so you can right click on any layer and you'll get a big menu of options and it's under attribute table. So right click attribute table for spatial layers. If you happen to click on a layer that's just a table and doesn't have any geometry or like points associated with it, then it will just be called open. Okay, any other questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Sorry. Okay, so I think the one thing I do know about GIS maybe is like on the left where it says drawing order, that order matters because it's like all building on each other. So just visually, like I have roads above streams and it looks really nice, but the streams are like going into the lake, which looks funny to me. Is there a way that you can have just the body of water for the lake and not have all those streams on top of it?
Yeah, so let me turn on lakes here. And I'll put on roads as well so we can see them better. Okay. Yeah, so you can play around with the order and you can click and hold and drag things up and down. So if you know that you want something in particular above or below something else, I'm going to just zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to make these water bodies blue. I'm going to right click and just make them blue. Okay. Did it go? Okay. There. So if you want the roads on top and then the lakes and then streams underneath, then you could just click and hold and drag things to be in that correct order. And then the stream line will be underneath the lake instead of on top of it, but the roads would still be on top. So it might take a little practice and a little trial and error to get that in the right order. All right, any other questions right now?
I just have a quick question. How do I now minimize that attributes table again so that it's not like taking over my map?
Yeah, yeah. So you can see when you have the tables open, it just keeps encroaching on the map. But what you can do is go down to that table and see how I opened 2 tables and they each have a little X right here. Just click on the X on them, and then they'll go away.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go back to the slides. So hopefully we have a good, you know, small but decent start now with ArcGIS Pro and kind of getting the feel for it. ArcGIS Pro is a huge, huge, giant piece of software. It takes a long time to really, truly be comfortable with. But if you leave this workshop over the next few days with like general understanding of how things work and know kind of in general where things are and where the buttons are and where the menus are, that's kind of a good goal to have for this. We don't have a whole semester here, right? We only have a few days.